Brutal. A minister and a high-ranking socialist official conspired to overthrow Pedro Sánchez, taking advantage of the tsunami of corruption in the Socialist Party. Let's get started. Hello everyone and welcome to a new edition of Medidas Cautelares. And pay attention because this is huge. The conspiracy within the Socialist Party against Pedro Sánchez himself is beginning. You heard that, right? And pay attention because the two conspirators are two familiar faces, and one of them is a minister in Pedro Sánchez's own government. You heard that, right? Stay until the end of the video because you're going to be amazed by the information I'm going to share with you today, which will reveal what's happening behind the scenes in the Socialist Party. Because the quarrels and backstabbing are starting within the PSOE, and this is certainly good news for all Spaniards who want Sanchismo to end. Let's share this information on screen. By the way, if you haven't done it yet, come on, remember to subscribe. Goodbye. Welcome to the Medidas Cautelares channel. We're on our way to achieving our goal. 150,000 subscribers before August. We have 1 month left and I'm sure we're going to achieve it with your help, of course. And we already have the photo. We have the names of the conspirators. Let's put it on the screen. Here they are, two familiar faces. Here you have Pedro Sánchez on the left, very young, and here you have the two conspirators. Óscar López, current minister in Pedro Sánchez's government, and Antonio Hernando, who is Secretary of State. Well then, two old friends of Pedro Sánchez, one of them a minister, the other a Secretary of State. The three Pepiños boys, I'll tell you later what this Pepiños boys thing is about. Well, they're already at each other's throats, preparing for the fall of Pedro Sánchez. Let's get to the information. I know you're really going to like it. The Minister for Digital Transformation and leader of the Madrid PSOE, Óscar López, and the Secretary of State for Telecommunications, and therefore Óscar López's number 2 in that ministry, Antonio Hernando. They are conspiring to overthrow the Prime Minister, Pedro Sánchez, taking advantage of the tsunami of corruption that is sweeping through the Socialist Party. The PSOE is cornered by numerous cases of corruption, which could lead to the party itself being charged with alleged crimes of criminal organization or illegal party financing. Meanwhile, Pedro Sánchez, at the closing of the PSOE Federal Committee this weekend, addressed the socialist leaders who were calling for early general elections, pointing out that they do not want the PSOE to govern and that they are a minority faction and should abandon all hope. This is what Pedro Sánchez said. Basically for Emiliano García Page, president of Castilla-La Mancha, right? But he's not the only one because here behind the scenes the conspiracy is brewing to bring down Pedro Sánchez, to bring down Julius Caesar. Today we have Brutus and another Roman senator who stabbed Julius Caesar. Sources close to the PSOE leadership consulted by Medidas Cautelares state that Óscar López and Antonio Hernando are maneuvering internally in the party against Pedro Sánchez. In fact, they tell us they haven't stopped conspiring against Sánchez since they first betrayed him in 2016. Hernando is always the one who carries out these moves, while López supports him from the shadows. Remember that on October 1st of that year, 2016, at the Federal Committee that removed Pedro Sánchez as Secretary General, Antonio Hernando worked for the caretaker committee that was created after the dismissal of his then friend Pedro Sánchez. Meanwhile, Óscar López supported Patxi López's candidacy in the PSOE primaries. To this, we must add that López himself even met with Commissioner José Manuel Villarejo to obtain information about the zonas owned by Pedro Sánchez's father-in-law, Sabiniano Gómez, to use it against Pedro Sánchez himself. In other words, they are the traitors. The people, as always. I mean, what happens is that, of course, someone who is a traitor for life. Pedro Sánchez, Óscar López, and Antonio Hernando rose through the ranks of the PSOE by taking advantage of their closeness to the former party organization secretary and Minister of Public Works, José Blanco. That's why they were called the Pepiños boys, Pepiño Blanco. Well, they say that Blanco still has a lot of power behind the scenes in the Socialist Party, and through Óscar López and Antonio Hernando, they tried to take Santos Cerdán down before the corruption scandals of the Coldo network broke out. Santos Cerdán wasn't controlled by Blanco, unlike López and Hernando. The Pepiños boys have always spread their bets. Hernando founded the consulting firm Cento together with Blanco, and his wife Hernando's wife Anabel Mateos worked at that firm. The same sources consulted emphasize that Óscar López and Antonio Hernando are preparing to replace Pedro Sánchez, taking control of the Madrid Socialist Federation and exploiting the party's Federal Executive Committee. López is the current Secretary General of the PSM, the Madrid Socialist Party. Meanwhile, Hernando has entered the executive committee indirectly through his wife Anabel Mateos, whom we mentioned a moment ago, who is the current Deputy Secretary of Organization and Transparency and Democratic Action. That is, Antonio Hernando's wife is already part of the executive committee of the Socialist Party because she is the PSOE's number 2 official for organization. But attention, the decision of the Socialist Councillor of the Madrid City Council, Emma López, to announce her candidacy to contest the primaries for the mayoralty of the capital against the current leader of the PSOE in the city and former Minister of Industry, the Sánchez supporter Reyes Maroto, they tell us. It cannot be separated from the internal maneuvers of López and Hernando to undermine Sánchez. That is, according to these sources, Emma López would be in line with Óscar López. And that's why they would have made this move in some way to try to undermine Pedro Sánchez. Because their candidate, the pro-Sánchez candidate, is Reyes Maroto, a close friend of his wife, Begoña Gómez. Does this seem like too little to you? Don't worry, there's more. There's more because now we're going to talk about another legend of the channel, María Jesús Montero, the one who went on a romantic vacation, or we don't know what kind, with Vicente Fernández, the former president of Sepia, at that romantic hotel in Las Salinas, in Cabo de Gata, in Almería. Well, pay attention to what they're telling us about María Jesús Montero. The same sources consulted by this newspaper point out that María Jesús Montero is another leader of the Socialist Party who has aspired to replace Pedro Sánchez, although her moves have gone unnoticed. Montero is the number 2 in the PSOE, as she is the current Deputy Secretary General. When Sánchez announced in April 2024 a few days of reflection to decide about his future, Montero maneuvered to position herself and replace the president of the government if he finally stepped back. As you know, he didn't. He said he was deeply in love but that he wasn't leaving La Moncloa. María Jesús Montero also secretly supported the moves of the former Deputy Secretary General of the PSOE, Adriana Lastra, who finally ended up resigning in July 2022 and was sidelined from the PSOE's frontline after clashing with Santos Cerdán. We're told that Montero has always conspired behind the scenes in the party and has wielded more power than Santos Cerdán himself. And this is the information we reveal in precautionary measures. Minister Óscar López and his Secretary of State, Antonio Hernando, are conspiring against the President of the government, Pedro Sánchez, taking advantage of the tsunami of corruption that is sweeping through the Socialist Party itself. It must be said that Óscar López and Antonio Hernando already betrayed Pedro Sánchez 10 years ago when Pedro Sánchez stopped being the Secretary General of the PSOE, and now they're doing it again. According to the sources consulted, in reality, Hernando and Óscar López have never stopped conspiring against Pedro Sánchez. And now, faced with the possible fall of the PSOE leader, they are maneuvering in the shadows and positioning themselves to prepare for the replacement of the Prime Minister himself. This is the information that we are sharing on Medidas Cautelares, and it is sure to cause quite a stir. it's going to stir things up a lot. It's going to really shake the hornet's nest of the Socialist Party, because this is where the backstabbing begins. Julio Cesar Sánchez is about to fall, and the conspiracies are beginning in the Roman Senate. And there you have at the forefront Óscar López and Antonio Hernando. Let's not forget María Jesús Montero either, who has also been aspiring and maneuvering in the shadows for a long time to see if she can succeed Pedro Sánchez. Any news, any reaction, any consequence that comes from this information we've revealed exclusively here on Medidas Cautelares, of course, you'll have it firsthand on this channel. That's it for this edition of Medidas Cautelares. I hope you enjoyed the video, that it was also entertaining, and why not, fun? Because hey, internal conspiracies in parties are really fun. You know, they're already starting to stab each other in the back, right? When they see that the leader might fall, the backstabbing begins. And there you have the little traitors, doing what they do best. Leave me your opinions, your comments. You know I really appreciate them, and I read as many as I can with the time I have. And you also know that you can become members, like in Medidas Cautelares, like the chosen ones, for less than 3 euros a month, or like the supreme ones for less than 7 euros a month. You can also contribute via Bizum at 62755636370. 627 55 63 63 70. The most important thing, as I always say, is that this information reaches everyone, because information is power. See you soon.